Today, we're going to talk about conflict resolution and specifically developing mediation skills to help ourselves. In HR, we're often asked to informally mediate various conflicts. So why not just get the skill? That's all coming up right now. Hi there, I'm Andrea Adams, and this is the HR Hub. On the show, we talk about anything related to HR. I encourage you to subscribe to the show or podcast to keep learning from my guests. Today, my guest is Kate Otting. Kate, I came across her when I was looking for someone to talk to about alternative dispute resolution. Someone from my audience asked about that. Her name came up because mediation is an aspect of alternative dispute resolution. Kate has had an interesting career for sure. She's the head of Interaction Management Associates, and they specialize in mediation. She has lectured, she's worked in South Africa, she's been the Director of Mediation for the Iowa Peace Institute and the Arizona Attorney General. Currently, she's the Director of Mediation for the City of Phoenix. Hi, Kate. How are you?
Great. Thanks for having me. This is exciting.
Yeah. So if you want to break down the skills of mediators, because we're going to look to embed some of that in our HR work, what are those various skills?
That's a great question. And, the skills that mediators have are probably the same skills that any HR expert has, right? So you have them, I'm guessing.
I have some of them, but I cannot possibly have it to the degree you do.
Well, and they're used differently, right? In a different context. And so that's why mediation training, I'm a big proponent of getting the mediation training so that you round it out and apply those skills to conflict resolution. And so there are obvious skills that I'm sure you and I share, right? And those are active listening, right? It's pretty obvious.
Yeah.
Empathy, right? And patience. I would say those are the top three, just having that sense of patience. But then there are less obvious skills. And a lot of these are ones that maybe we don't have that are naturally, it can be learned. And so one of them, for starters, is just self-awareness of how we respond to conflict. And once we have some awareness of what our default response is to conflict, then we'll have a better sense of how we respond to other people's conflicts as well as our own conflicts. We're involved when we're pulled into the conflict. And I really believe that the more we can practice in conflict, and so, one of the courses that I have, the mediators practice over and over and over. And the more comfortable they become with conflict, I hear so many mediators say, gosh, after I practice this and I've sat in the mediator role, I can actually engage in conflicts with more confidence in my workplace, in my family, in my community, and with my crazy uncle, that kind of thing. So it just makes it a little bit easier to engage in those really difficult conversations, even on an interpersonal level. So that self-awareness is so important. It makes it easier then to listen when we have that self-awareness. We recognize what our own default style is, then we can sit back and go, oh, there it is. There it is, and then we can offer more empathy and we can offer more patience. Also less obvious is one that, mediators have talked about traditionally being impartial. Right. You probably heard that.
Right. Yeah.
Impartiality.
Yeah.
And the more I have mediated, the more, and I didn't really know how to label it, but I recently came across somebody who labeled it as omnipartiality. So kind of taking it to another level, instead of saying, oh, I'm impartial, this is your conflict, I have no part of it, stepping to each party's side and going, I get where you're coming from, and being able to articulate the conflict from that person's side. And I usually kind of warn people too, like, just so you know, I'm going to step to her side for a little bit and really articulate the problem. And when you hear that, you're going to feel like I took her side. And you know what? I did momentarily, but I'm going to give you that same courtesy. So if I prepare each party and give them that, then they sit a little bit more comfortably. I learned the hard way because I wasn't, sometimes like people will say, you're biased. So that omnipartiality, I think, is something that mediators cultivate. That is really an important skill that mediators have. And it's, like I said, it's relatively a new idea, new concept that's emerging in our field.
I want to follow up on two things there. The first was patience. That's an interesting one. No one's ever talked on my show yet. You are the first to talk about patience in any form. What does patience look like when you're mediating?
Well, when you're mediating, it's easy to be patient because it's not my conflict, right? And so I find that it's easy to just, instead of interrupting someone and saying, wait a minute, you can't say that, letting them say it and letting them hear what they just said and reflecting back, so you just said those people. And did you notice her reaction when you said those people? I just recently had a case. Those people who drive those cars, I can't stand those cars. Oh, so it has to do with the cars? Really, let's hold them hold them accountable to what they said, but by reflecting and being patient instead of reacting. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It's I thought you were going to talk about just letting silence, go on, and that kind of patience. It was a different kind of patience you're talking about.
That as well. In my mediation classes, I tell people that probably the best thing I learned from my grandmother was, and we called her Golden Grams, and she would say, there's a reason the words listen and silent have the same letters. And she would just drop that in and we'd all go silent. Right?
As we do like the letter math in our head, listen, silent.
Yes. So listen and silent have the same letters. And so, yes, and that requires patience too. And being okay with somebody just going on and on and on and talking. So letting that play out and then letting them have an opportunity to say, oh, I've said too much or I'm talking too much. And say, well, tell me more about that. What's going on? And getting to those underlying, what's happening to them. One of the things that I do in the mediation class that I teach is I ask people to react to the word conflict.
When I think about my self-awareness around conflict, I think about it in a fairly binary sense, that there's conflict avoiders and there's conflict lovers. And I don't want to be a conflict lover, so I'm definitely a conflict avoider. And it's just like you've got two options. There have to be a lot more options. So I'm hoping you can elaborate on the various ways people, or the various levels of self-awareness we should think about when thinking about conflict.
We know that the innate human response to conflict is fight or flight, right?
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Or freeze. A lot of us talk about fight, flight, or freeze. Some people go, I'm either going to run or I'm going to get into it. I don't know. That kind of deer in the headlights. I don't know how to deal with this. And so in order to really understand our reaction, and of course, we're all going to be different in different circumstances. The way we respond in the workplace might be different than the way we respond, at home. And the way we respond, I know that when I interact with my mother, sometimes I become my 13-year-old bratty self, So there are just different ways that we respond and recognizing where's that coming from. So one of the things that I do in when I go out and train, or in my online courses as well, is in the online course, I have about 300 people from around the world, participating in the course. So I do this thing, and I don't know if you've ever done those word clouds where, the more you get into a word, the bigger it gets. Yes. So I ask the question, what words come to mind when you think about conflict? And the word that is huge and front and center is fear. So after, several years of doing this, 300 people in the course now, from around the world, the consensus is we all fear conflict and it's inevitable. And if I do this, I just did this with a group of people a couple of weeks ago, same thing. And, so it's just hands down, it doesn't matter where we are in the world. It's just our human. I just, anecdotally, I wouldn't say, I wouldn't say our innate experience with conflict is fear.
Mm-hmm.
So how do we respond to that? Fight, flight, or freeze. And so how to train ourselves to not do those two, like you were saying, either jump right in it or run away from it, avoid it, is to feel more comfortable with it and to fear it less. So if we can get to a place where we go, okay, I survived that one. Maybe I can do it again. And one of the easiest ways to do that is in the mediator seat when it's not my conflict, right? So if I'm observing other people's conflicts and I can help them kind of shepherd them through this difficult conversation and then see it come out on the end, with a resolution. And resolution is not always closure. It's not always perfect. It's not happy. Oftentimes, I'll say that people come in, with absolutely low expectations. And then at some point in the mediation, it goes way, way up and everybody's happy. And the mediator's feeling like, oh, right, this is going to resolve. This is great. But usually it ends at, meh, I can live with that. And that's really, I joke that I think our field is the only one where mediocrity is our goal, Okay,
Mediocrity is
with that. Is everybody okay with that? Yeah, not really what I was hoping for, but it's better than the alternative. And that's the important thing.
all right.
It was festering. It was painful. It was scary. All of the things that drove us to that fight or flight. I got through that and I'm at meh, that's better.
Yes,
And sometimes it's a little better than meh,
Typically, we all come with some degree of those, but yet you're also proposing that we need to introduce mediation skills into the organization and and especially for HR, why, if we all come with those to begin with?
Well, we all come with those, but we also come with that fear, right? And so in the face of conflict, we have all kinds of things. Amygdala hijack, our brain freezes, and we get scared when we face. And so, those default reactions jump, come front and center. And so really unlearning those is going to help us create that sense of harmony in the organization. Conflict is costing organizations bundles, billions of dollars, right? And so we know that. There was a study that, the Myers-Briggs people and the Thomas Kilmann instrument folks, they came together on, I think it was 2008, and did a research that came out with a study that showed that just in the U.S. alone, corporations were spending $359 billion US on conflicts alone. So it's costly. Conflict is costly. So, if we could look at just the bottom line of what it's costing us, investing in measures that can help us not necessarily prevent conflict, but create a sense of harmony so that we can manage conflicts and feel more comfortable and engage through the conflicts.
I think about the ones we face in HR, and we're usually mediating them or being asked to get involved, but not at the same time. We don't get everybody in the same room at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
How is that different than normal mediation?
Well, sort of the good and the bad of mediation is that it's still relatively new and unregulated, right? So when you say informal mediation, I would say it's all informal, right?
Yeah.
And so oftentimes, even if you're not mediating with people in the room and you're doing, what we call shuttle negotiation, maybe you're picking up the phone
Yes.
one
That's it.
person
Yes.
and then you talk to the other person. Can you
Yes.
listen to this? Yeah. That sort of thing. That's mediation. I mean, that's still mediation. And by definition, and so you're still using those same skills and you're still trying to foster a resolution. And oftentimes, a lot of times we like to think that the resolution is going to be everybody getting together and shaking hands and hugging and, popping a cork and celebrating. Like I said, it's usually meh, right?
Right.
The end result was sort of like, mediocrity. And so sometimes, and I kid you not, the resolution is we agree to never speak to one another again. And then I find out later that helps everyone in the organization.
Oh.
Right? Everybody's so happy that they aren't talking to each other that we all feel like going to work now, or we lay out an agreement of how they will communicate and we will limit their communication. And maybe it's only going to be via email and maybe it's going to be limited to 5 sentences and maybe a supervisor is going to be CC'd in all of those emails. And we'll try that out for a year. We'll revisit it, come back and see how that went. So sometimes the agreement isn't pie in the sky, everybody's having everybody over for chicken dinner on Sunday. It's, you know what? This is putting a framework that makes everybody feel safe, kind of creating that psychological safety that everybody can live with. And oftentimes the two disputants were like, yeah, we thought of that all along. I thought of that. I didn't think she would like that. And so when they, and of course it's their solution, like, I would love to never talk to her again. And the other person says, me too, but we have to work together. Okay, well, tell me how that's going to work out. Well, we can do that. We don't have to talk to each other. So it's those sorts of solutions that can be really, really creative and they can be done without being in the same room. So
I have a couple questions. One is, you were talking about that they're never going to talk to each other. That's part of the solution. That often, like solutions like that, like you are on the same team. We need like the team to be functional, collaborating. We cannot allow 2 team members to limit the amount of collaborating they do. How does that sort of thing get surfaced and addressed?
Again, that's going to depend on the organization. I mean, that did come up in a case that I had a couple of years ago, where, and any conflict that I ever work with, I'm told like this much about, tiny fraction of what's actually going on. But as I start to peel back the proverbial onion, I start to realize that the epicenter, there's multiple epicenters of the conflict. So I had one recently where it really came down to 2 individuals. It was an entire team that was having all kinds of problems. But, everybody kept pointing to these 2. And they would say, and they were best friends. And they were best friends. And how is it that they can't get along? And part of it was because they were best friends. And they had so much trust in one another. And they literally couldn't speak to one another. And the fallout of it was one of the individuals just really decided it was time for her to leave. She was on her way out anyway, and in a private caucus, which was what we call that in mediation, the parties can meet with me individually and tell me something that they just don't want to tell everyone else and just bounce, whether it's to bounce ideas off me. But she said, in reality, I'm actually out job hunting. My foot was out the door before we even came to mediation. And so then it was, okay, so at what point can I tell your supervisor? Because I think this will really help the organization to move on and help you and help your former friend, to move on. There might be a sense of relief. Do you want to work on patching up the friendship? So that sort of thing. Oftentimes that is the actual, sort of like the 5 dysfunctions of a team. If you've read that book,
Yeah.
In that book, sometimes that is the realistic solution. Sometimes somebody's got to go.
One question I have, and it's quite specific. it's around bullying and harassment. Then you'll get one employee accuse another of bullying and harassment. Do you mediate those ones?
Yeah, the difficulty is, it's difficult to prove if someone is a bully or is being bullied, right? And a lot of times, if I hear, and a lot of times they're not going to mediate. They're not going to ask me to mediate if the employer already knows that ahead of time.
Yeah.
But I had one case in particular. It was in higher ed, a department that, come to find out there were conflicts that had been manifesting for about 18 years, right?
Wow.
For a long, long, long time. And there was one professor who was kind of on his way out, and some of the folks felt like, well, can we just find a way to scoot him out because he's causing all kinds of problems? Well, then when I get everybody in, I mediate. I just start talking to individuals. I start realizing that the other individuals say, no, he's not just a troublemaker. He is literally a bully. And some of them felt unsafe. Well, so when we tried to approach that with this individual, he came back with unsafe. I'm the one who's unsafe, and turned all of these things into civil rights complaints. He said, I'm a gay man, and I know that this person is anti-gay. I'm Jewish, and so some of these concerns that he had, and it was very painful for me, right? I mean, I could feel the pain on each person's side coming out, and I really just had to put a pause to this and say, I don't think anyone here feels safe enough to actually work through this conflict. And in fact, that particular professor asked for an investigation. What ended up happening is there was an investigation. And they through that investigation, they came out with a solution that actually he would just be moved into another building until his retirement. And so I've since heard that there's a lot more harmony in the department, and they really felt that got started in the mediation. That people were able to say some of the things that they were afraid to say in faculty meetings.
Okay, we need to wrap it up. Where can someone learn? Yeah, I could ask a lot of questions for a long time. Where could someone learn more
about mediation? I would say go to my website, imamediation.com. Okay. And I've got loads of articles that talk about, the skills, many of these things that we talked about in here, the skills that are needed to mediate, dealing with the fear of conflict, those sorts of things. So I would say that's a great place. Another great place is, in fact, run by Colin Rule, is mediate.com. is a great resource.
All right, I'll put those in. I know you're also offering, if my audience wants to get involved and take the course, you're offering
30%.
30%. Perfect. I will put a link to that.
Okay.
In the show notes.
Yeah, so they'll get special pricing if they use your code HR Hub.
Okay, perfect.
On any of our courses. That's great.
I'll put that in the show notes. Okay. Thanks, Kate. Well, that was helpful, and I am going to reflect on my relationship to conflict because I have been seeing it too narrow a focus, I think. However, we've reached the end of this episode. I did another episode on tips for dealing with upset employees, and the link to that's right here. Thanks for watching out there, and we'll see you next time.